So please join me in welcoming Russ Swanson.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for showing up today here. She said that we'll try to get you out here by 4 o'clock. Is that? Just kidding. However, I do feel like I could talk that long on it because I've been doing a lot of research on this, and the hard part is knowing where to, where to draw the line. So the fun part for me is when I do these presentations, everyone's actually different because I try to gear it a little bit more to the area in which I'm speaking. So. Just to start off, this is actually the 150th anniversary of the Northfield raid. So kind of a special year in that remarks as well. And I should ask, everybody can hear me just flying back there? Alrighty. Usually I'm yelling at 8th graders in the shop class, so if this goes out, don't worry, we have a good backup plan here. So, but we'll get started here. I'm just going to kind of stand off to the side a little bit. Usually I'm up front, but this way I can see a little bit better. We'll do a quick introduction on how I got started on this journey. I want to talk just a little bit about my research because there's so many stories out there. People are like, how do you know that's true? How did you do your research? How did you get started in this? So I'll spend just a minute or two on that. And then I'll talk about the Minnesota Expedition. That's the actual journey up to Minnesota with the James Younger gang. This here is the hard part for me. I love talking about the raid and the robbery itself. I'm just going to really do a quick summary of that. I could spend a lot of time on that, but we'll just try to do a summary. This is kind of the meat of it right here, mapping the escape. And once again, I have to kind of break this into parts. So for me, part 1 is usually from Northfield to Mankato. But we're going to, we'll just do a brief overview of that, but we'll put a little bit more emphasis on part 2. That's going to be where the James brothers and the Younger split. We'll wrap it up with a little bit of the aftermath, and then if there's time, I can show you some of the mapping demonstrations that I've been doing involving old township maps and Google Earth. Then we'll do some follow-up questions, and that's always kind of my favorite part too, is to go with that. So, real quick, this is a view of where I grew up. I still live here. So actually, my brother Phil with me here today. I have another brother, Steve, and we grew up on our great-great-grandfather's homestead, 1870 homestead, just south of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, along the banks of the Big Sioux River. And I don't think my little laser pointer will work on the screen here, but there's a little cabin you can see down there, and that cabin, I actually got a bigger picture of it. So that was built by Carl August Swanson in 1870. So we were kind of blessed growing up in this area, knowing some of our family's history. And so there's my brothers and I did some presentations in Sioux Falls, but there's a picture in the back there, and that would be my great-great-grandfather. This is the house that his son built, and this is the house that we grew up in, and that house is still today. My other brother lives on that farm. So anyways, that's kind of a little bit of background, but the interesting thing is, okay, here's Northfield, and here is where I live. People are like, how did you get interested in something that's so far away? And of course, this is a popular subject, but I got a personal attachment to it for this reason. That the yellow circle on the right is the farmstead that I just showed you. The X is where I live, and you see the circle on the left there. One day I was out doing some fencing in one of my horse pastures, and I found these two depressions in the ground, and I was curious. I remember my grandpa telling me when I was a kid, that would be the neighbor to your great-great-grandfather. So I wanted to know more about this guy. I did a little research through the government land office records, and I found his name was Peter Wall. And so I did a Google search of Peter Wall, Canton, Dakota Territory, and I was reading this article, and I started, like, oh my gosh, this is really, really cool. September 19th, 1876, Peter Wall was working a few miles south of there along the banks of the Big Sioux River and had his horse stolen by gunpoint by Frank and Jesse James. So that hooked me to the story, and I'm like, okay, this is cool. Where did they come from before that? So I started wanting to know, where did these guys come from, and that's kind of led my journey on my research. So real quick on the Brown County stuff, this was their escape from Northfield, and I'm going to do a little bit of talking on Northfield. We will do most of our stuff here in the Brown County area and a little bit south of here, and then I'm also going to talk about my area, Dakota Territory, because quite honestly, this is where there was not a lot of information on that when I first started, and that's how I actually started doing presentations. It was never my intention to do presentations or write a book or any of that. I was just wanting to kind of satisfied my own curiosity, so to speak. And in doing my research, I ended up writing a poem, and I'm not a poet by any means, but some of it did rhyme, so that's good, I guess. But I wrote a poem called 3 Days in Dakota, and there was an author that had written a couple books on the subject, and he was really intrigued by that, and so he wanted to come visit with me. And as I showed him what I had come up with, he's like, man, he said, you know more than I do. You need to start getting this information out to the public. So he convinced me to do a presentation in Sioux Falls at Augustana College, and then from there, just kind of people got calling me to do presentations. So, and then from that, they wanted me to write a book. So that's kind of how that got laid out, and it was pretty fun. So that's going to be our focus areas. I did find a really cool another connection here recently. Last week I was out in Faribault, and as I was doing some research with in Dakota, I'm kind of my new hobby now is the Dakota War. But there was the Minnesota Cavalry Company F. There's a guy here by the name of Edward Dampier. You're going to see his name pop up a little bit later on. But it is this gun right here, 50 caliber Smith carbine. It was really cool because about an hour ago we were upstairs and I found 2 of them in your museum. So if you're missing them later, I have no idea where they are. But it's this gun that really led to the capture, and I will explain that a little bit later on, but this was a very, very significant gun to deal with this. So anyways, real quick, let's talk about my research. I wanted to come as closely as possible to what actually happened. And so in researching this here, you want to start with a credible, notice I underlined credible. What is credible? Okay, so I came across this article in the 1924 Argus Leader. And in here it talked about a book called The Northfield Tragedy that was written by one of the posse members, and he was also a reporter from St. Paul. And he was literally with these guys day by day, recording, sending messages back and forth. And I'm thinking, man, that would be really cool to find that. Well, I was doing some research. Here's an advertisement, a couple advertisements for that publication that came out. So these were publications as an advertisement from 1876. 1876. You'll notice that his name is, it says his last name is Lemon there. That was his pen name. This is actually the guy here. His name was J.H. Hansen. Yep, and it's really cool researching this guy because he did a lot of interesting stuff. He was literally with the posse from day one all the way until Laverne, Minnesota, when he was with Sheriff Dale from Winona. So I do some looking. I find the book on Amazon. They had one left. It was $36, and I hit buy. Okay, it could have said $136. I still would have hit buy. My wife would have killed me, but I still would have done it. But so I find this book, and it's awesome. Of course, the best part. The next day, I find you can download it for free. I'll leave that up there. But like Cole Younger's book, there's this awesome website. All this stuff is in the public domain, and so, well, again, it was really cool to be able to follow this. It's almost like you were there, and that was kind of the premise for my book. I did a lot of other research. A lot of other research as well to kind of verify the stuff. But what was cool is he would talk about names of people that they stopped at. And so because of that, I was able to look up old original land patent records using the rectangular survey system. In my ag class, I teach a lot of this stuff, so I was very familiar. And it was really nice, if you notice the green section there of Minnesota, Minnesota, Dakota, the area I was studying is all in the 5th principal meridian, so that made the research a little bit easier on that. Minnesota has a terrific website for doing land transfer records in some of these counties. So for example, there's a guy named Levi Sager that was outside of Shieldsville that they kidnapped, so I was able to trace down exactly where he lived. And if you see these old township maps, you see the little black squares on them. That means that's where the house actually was of that person. So you can literally get within several hundred yards of where these events actually occurred. The other thing, if you guys are doing research, use historic maps, because a lot of times the towns would actually move, or even township names themselves would change. So when you're hearing about something, try to get a map as close as possible when you're researching. This one was really cool. This is a copy of the 1874 Andreas map that was found on the body of Bill Chadwell. And that was to be very significant, because here I am looking at the same map that those guys would have been looking at as they were trying to navigate through Minnesota. Other good sources, there's census records. Again, Minnesota's got a great website. Family Search is a good one. Old newspapers, but you got to be careful, because just like today, these newspapers were really trying to get the news out there, and so I'd have to go back and just kind of, okay, here's the story. How can we prove that that was true? Oh, there's a name spelled wrong, and believe me, I've ran across a few of those, and I had to do a lot of research to find the correction of the name. But anyways, that is it. That's kind of how I get started, so let's begin with this. One of the first questions I usually get is, why Minnesota? These guys, they knew Missouri, Kentucky, they knew a lot of the area down south, but why did they choose Minnesota? The answer to that is actually pretty simple. If you see Kansas City in the top left there, here's Otterville, Missouri. Otterville, here's a kind of an overview outside of town. There was a bend in the railroad track, and there's a place called Rocky Cut. And where my red circle is, you can see a little parking lot on top. There's actually an overview, so you can stop at a roadside park and look down. This is where they robbed this train. And this was on July 7th of 1876, 2 months before Northfield. So in that robbery was Frank and Jesse, Cole Younger, Bob Younger, Sam Wells, who I will, after this point, I'll call him Charlie Pitts. It's kind of interesting. He's the only guy that's still known by his alias, where everybody else is known by their real name. So Charlie Pitts was with him. Then we had Clell Miller, Bill Chadwell, and to round out the group was a newcomer named Hobbs Carey. And so they robbed this train. They got about almost $500,000 in today's money, and they got away clean. It was a good robbery for them. They split up like they always do, started doing their own thing, kind of laying low. Except for Hobbs Carey, he started gambling, throwing his money around, threw a lot of suspicion on him, and he got arrested a little bit later on. And as a result of that, he spilled the beans, and he told everybody, here's who was with me: Frank James, Jesse James, Cole Younger. And he just listed everybody, gave physical descriptions of them, and so the heat was on. And so they knew they had to get out of Missouri, and according to Cole Younger, so there's Missouri, here's the Twin Cities, they decided to go 450 miles north, and again, according to Cole, this was their last big robbery they were going to do, and then they were going to move out of the country. He had been to Cuba before. He had spent time in Florida, so Cole Younger actually knew some of these places. But again, this is Cole Younger talking, and I still take a little bit of grain of salt with some of the stuff that he said. But I'm sure, this is my last. This is it. We're going to quit after this. But okay, whatever. But anyway, so that was the plan. So this is where I really started to follow the Minnesota stuff. The expedition began. They decided to put this plan together. So there's Frank, Jesse, Cole, Bob, the other three, but they were missing. Obviously, Hobbs Carey was in jail at this point, so they needed an eighth person, and so they had to get they needed somebody they could trust this time. Somebody wasn't going to squeal on them. So they were one man short. So they enlisted Jim Younger. So that rounds out your gang of 8 that came to Minnesota. Now these guys were smart. I mean, they weren't all going to travel in one big group, so they traveled in groups of 2 and 3, and they headed up from Missouri to Sioux City. They literally took the railroad all the way from Missouri up here. A lot of people think they rode their horses. They actually took the Sioux City-St. Paul Railroad, and here's what was cool about this. I don't know what day they left. We know it was in mid-August sometime, but we know what time they were, because I found this in the 1876 newspaper of Sioux City of the time schedule. So it kind of shows you the route that they had taken. They'd stop at Mankato for breakfast that morning. So it was a 13-hour train ride to get them up to the Twin Cities. Once they get up here, we've got a few of these guys staying as aliases in the Nicolette Hotel. And about 9 miles away, we've got the rest of them staying at the Merchants Hotel. All right, so on August 26th, this is really when the operation starts. This is when they start getting their planning together and start to get things figured out. So they get into 2 groups, and they decide to separate. One group went to the southwest, and one group went to the southeast. So they needed to get good horses, figure out what was going on, intelligence, find a bank, familiarize the country, how they're going to get out of Minnesota, and more importantly, who are they going to rob? What bank are they going to rob? So that was really what they were all about. August 26th, and I got really good documentation on this. Group number 1, Jesse, Frank, Jim, and Clell, they leave St. Paul and show up in Red Wing, Minnesota. And they checked in at the National Hotel, which we were there a couple weeks ago. Really, really cool. I'd love to go back to Red Wing. But they stayed, at least 2 of them. We don't know if all 4, but we know 2 of them stayed here. And actually found the name of the guys that they purchased horses from. His name was Seebach. and I did a lot of research to actually try to figure out which person was riding what color horse. And this really was, there's a lot of research that went involved to do that, but it really helped when you go back and read the stories. So when eyewitness accounts talk about some guy on a buckskin horse, you have a pretty good idea who that would have been. So this was really cool too. They found saddles and bridles. They got those from the novelty harness shop owned by E.P. Watson. They bought cartridges for the Whitney gun store. And they also bought these things, okay? I'm gonna model this real quick. All right, a lot of times, you see in the movies when they're wearing the dusters that we're familiar with today, but this is actually what they bought. This is called an Inverness cape. It was very good, it was lightweight, but they did call it a duster because it would help keep the dust out of your clothes when you're on the trail. Sleeveless, but it was also very good for concealing firearms. And so it was really cool because I actually seen an advertisement for Inverness capes out of the Red Wing newspaper. So I'm still tracking that store down. But and there's the article that talks about all the stuff I just told you about. This came out exactly a week after the robbery in 1876. So here's the harness shop. We went down there and found the location of the harness shop. Now I don't know if that was the same building, but it is the exact location. And went inside and talked to the owner, and they were thrilled to know some of the history of their building there. So it's now a coffee shop. So if you go to Red Wing, go to Mandy's Coffee Shop. Tell them Jesse James sent you, okay? Maybe a free cup of coffee, who knows? But really cool. When they left Red Wing, they again, I'm not going to go into a lot of this stuff, but they stopped at overnight at this place here. You can see the beverage farm, and here's an old map that shows it. And when we went out there, we actually took a picture of that farm place. We drove up there, nobody was home. I could hear some barks and dogs barking inside, but didn't want to press my luck on that one. So that's group one. Group two was supposed to be Cole, Charlie, Bob, and Bill, and they were going to take the train to St. Peter, Minnesota. So we get to, they leave the train, and Bob and Bill had missed the train. So it ended up just being Cole and Charlie. First night they stay at the Nicollet House Hotel. Building is actually still in St. Peter. It's not a hotel, but very, very cool building. The rest of the time they spent at the American Hotel. Why they checked on the first one, it was kind of assumed there was maybe a little disagreement between Cole and the owner, but they didn't want to make waves, so they just quietly checked out and checked into this place. In Cole's book, he actually talked about buying horses from a guy named French and a guy named Hodge. So I did a little research on that. French's name was actually still on there, and I did the government land office records to find out. So that's where they bought their horses. And it was really cool because I was talking to a guy from the area last week, and he goes, well, there's actually a place called French Hill right on the edge of the lake there. So pretty cool. So tracking that stuff down, that's the color horses they got. This is a fantastic story here. I'm not going to have time to tell all of it, but I need to have you make a mental note of this. While Cole is green breaking his horse on the streets of St. Peter, this 6-year-old girl steps out in front of him and says, I can ride horses too, and this brazen little girl. Cole is so impressed with it, he actually picks her up, gives her a ride on the saddle, and they kind of make friends a little bit, and she's going to come actually back into play a little bit later on, so we'll get that. I just want you to remember the name Horace Greeley Perry for right now. But we quiz later, so make sure you know. Okay, so a quick overview of what I just told you here, just to show you on the map. Okay, so Bob and Bill missed the train, so they bought their horses in St. Paul, and they actually stayed in Northfield either the 30th or the 31st. We have good accounts from the newspaper that talk about that. While Cole and Charlie were waiting, they decided to keep continuing on. So they actually went to Medelia, and I made a special note of this because they stayed at the Flanders Hotel, and this was actually the thing that doomed them. Okay, we'll talk about that a little later as well, but they stopped at the Flanders, met the owner, Colonel Vogt, had a discussion about the area, and again, that's going to come back to play a little bit later on. They actually continue on to the eastern edge of Cottonwood County and stay at the John Doty farm, and then they start making their way back. So as I continue this, Frank and Jesse and their group come back. Jim and Clell, they split up and they go to St. Peter as well. So here we are, the weekend of the September 2nd, they all converge on Mankato. Okay, this was their original target. A lot of people don't realize that, but their original target was Mankato. They stayed at the Clifton House, not they, someone did. And this is an actual picture of the bank. This was their first target. So on Monday, they were going to rob this bank, and beforehand, somebody recognized Jesse James. A guy by the name of Charlie Robinson from Missouri was up here and seeing this guy that looks like Jesse, and so he goes, "Hey Jesse, what are you doing here?" Well, it freaked him out, and so they became ghosts at this point, and they abandoned that plan. So then they have to head back towards the east, and so they decided to head back to Northfield. If you're familiar with the area, east of Mankato, there's an area called the Big Woods. So a lot of farm ground now, but back then it was swamps and trees and just really, I got some pictures I'll show you a little later on. But that kind of gives you an example of, this is the route that they took on the way back. So Monday night, one group stays at Le Sueur, one stays at Janesville. Tuesday, Cole's group stays at Cordova. We're not sure where the group 2 stayed, it's either Morristown or Faribault. But Wednesday night, the night before the robbery, these are where they're at, Millersburg and what's a place called the Stetson Farm. So Thursday, September 7th, the day of the robbery, they get up, and here's the Stetson, a little documentation on the Stetson Farm. If you drive through Millersburg, this is where group number 1 stayed. Sam Cushman was the owner, and he said, you know, these guys were very polite and good stewards, and anyways, when they were actually, if you go through Millersburg, that's the place. So part of that house is still there. Across the street today there's a great place called Boonies. Okay, so I should do commercials for Boonies because they awesome place to eat and have some refreshments. But there was a place called the Millersburg store. And this is also, remember I said the Flanders Hotel is kind of what doomed the escape. This is what doomed the robbery. It was at the Millersburg store that Charlie Pitts bought a quart of whiskey. And again, that's going to come into play here in just a little bit. So as these two groups come together, they meet in a little park just outside, well, a little park today, but a little clearing just outside of Northfield. And this is the first time that these guys would be together since leaving Missouri. So they come up with a plan, they ride into Northfield, do some scoping, they come back, and then they set the plan in motion. So here's an actual picture of the bridge that goes into Northfield, the Mill Square. I did run this one through ChatGPT just to kind of get a little color to it and add a little flavor to it, I guess. But so this is what the view would look like on September 7th. This was their plan. So this is the Dampier Hotel. Remember Edward Dampier at the beginning of the program? This was his hotel. Right 2 doors down was the Wheeler's store, and that'll come into play. But this is what happened. These guys break up into 3 groups. Frank, Bob, and Charlie, they were the ones to go in the bank and rob it. Group number 2 is made of Cole and Clell, and their job was to be positioned outside the door of the bank, make sure nobody goes in, and just keep an eye on things. If things start going bad, then Cole was to fire a pistol shot in the air and signal this group to come in and help keep people off the streets. So group 3, their job was to guard the bridge and also to cut the telegraph lines on the way out as they come back across that bridge. Well, as you probably going to find out here, if you don't already, things didn't go according to plan. This is the Scriber Building in Northfield. This is what it looked like, a little bit closer to 1876. This is a little bit a newer picture, but I wanted to point out that staircase. So this is very similar to what it would have looked like that day. And there was 2 hardware stores just next to the bank, A.R. Manning and J.S. Allen. Both of these guys are about to play a real prominent role in this. This is what the building looks like today. Actually, that's not true. This is what it looks like today. They're doing a lot of remodeling, getting ready for the 150th, but it's the museum is still open, but they're making the facade exactly like it was back in the 1876 picture. So I'm looking forward to seeing that done. Alrighty, so here was their plan. Group number 1, like I said, they were going to ride in, go into the bank. Group 2, they were going to come up and be the cover, and group 3 was going to be positioned out here on the bridge. If they needed help, Cole would fire a signal shot, and they would come in and serve as backup. And they would all head out back to the west on that bridge and go through Millersburg, and life was good. This picture's kind of hard to see, but this was actually a drawing that came out of the newspaper a couple days after the robbery. This is a cool picture. I wanted to really make mention of this. In fact, I did a little better enhancement of this one. This is what Northfield would have looked like that day. And this is a very important picture because you see people, you see horses, but you do not see saddle horses. And Cole Younger actually mentioned this, the fact that they did not have saddle horses that day, he thought was awesome to their advantage because he's like, nobody's going to chase us in a horse and buggy. So they thought they were going to go in. So their confidence level was through the roof. And because of that, that first group, after they had their second meeting out on their way to town, they drank that quart of whiskey. So we've got Frank, Charlie Pitts, and Bob Younger were drunk, and their eyewitness accounts of the guys in the bank also said that they reeked of alcohol. So that was their initial blunder at Northfield. So the day of the robbery, here's what happens. J.S. Allen, hardware store owner, he's next to A.R. Manning and Henry Wheeler. Henry Wheeler is a 21-year-old medical student, 21 or 22, but he's a young medical student going to school out in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and he's on home from vacation. So he's sitting in front of his dad's pharmacy that morning. And just to give you a position where they're at, group number one comes in. They kind of raise suspicion because they're wearing stuff like this, and they all had really, really good saddle horses. I kind of equate that today. If you've seen like 5 red, Ferraris drive by, you might kind of pay special attention to that. And that's, it's so for as smart as they were trying to blend in and not draw attention, but they really did the opposite of that. They drew a lot of attention based on these looked like they were wearing some sort of uniform, and they had the best horses. But so a lot of eyewitness accounts. J.S. Allen was like, hey, these guys look kind of strange, and we get that same look when we come to Minnesota with our Cowboys, I think. So we were in Red Wing and like, are you guys from Texas? No, South Dakota. So anyways, but the second group comes in, so we got Clell and Cole, and J.S. Allen was like, something is not quite right. So he walks down to the bank and sees what's going on, and about the time he's going to leave, Clell Miller steps up, puts a pistol in his stomach, and says, "Don't you say a word, or I'm gonna kill you." Well, he shakes loose. J.S. Allen does, and he runs down the street and he yells the famous words, "Get your guns, boys! They're robbing the bank." This kind of set the alarm off for everyone. However, not as much as you would think. Even with the first pistol shots, people were a little blasé about it because, as luck would have it, there happened to be like a magician or there was some act in town that night, so they all thought it was part of the advertisement. So they're saying, "Oh, cool," but no, it was actually a robbery. But I will say Henry Wheeler saw what was going on, and he started yelling robbery as well. So Henry Wheeler runs into his dad's store to get his pistol. Forgot he lent that pistol out to somebody, so he runs out the back of the store and runs into the Dampier Hotel, where he got the Smith carbine. And because he knew that there was a gun in there. You got to remember that gun was not a very technologically advanced weapon at that time. We had a lot of the self-contained cartridges, so it was kind of an antique gun at that point, but it was still the only thing that he had. But it ended up being a very, very big factor in this entire thing. So he grabs this gun. He finds some of these. Remember, these are not metallic cartridges. It's just paper with a powder in it and percussion cap. So he grabs what he can find and goes to the 3rd story of the Dampier Hotel and takes a position. J.S. Allen, in the meantime, goes back to his hardware store. He starts handing out some guns. A guy by the name of Elias Stacy steps out, sees Clell Miller, and fires and hits him in the forehead with some buckshot. Okay, and you can see by his forehead. Didn't kill him. Pretty painful. So Clell is down the ground, and he gets up and makes his way up back onto his horse. At this time, the pistol shot goes off by Cole, and the backup group comes up, and they start raising havoc. Their job was to ride up and down the street, getting people off, shooting, and just scaring people. They'd ride down to 5th Street, and they would reload. And so all this commotion is going on. Now we've got A.R. Manning coming out of his hardware store, and he's got a 45-70 rolling block, and he takes a position at them steps that I showed you earlier. Okay, first shot comes from Henry Wheeler from that elevated position in the Dampier Hotel, and he misses. He shoots at Jim Younger, and he misses, hits the side of the building. Takes a second shot, hits Clell Miller. slices his subclavian artery, and he bleeds out within minutes. So Clell is the first one to get shot and to die in the streets of Northfield there. Okay, second shot comes from A.R. Manning. He's trying to get a position, he's trying to shoot, and some of the guys on the street are smart enough to hide behind their horses. So A.R. Manning just shoots the horse. So sad to say, but he shot, but he actually killed Bob Younger's horse, and that's what really another thing that really set them back, because they don't have enough horses to get out of town now. So this commotion's going on, and we've got this young gentleman from Sweden. I believe only been in town here for a couple weeks, or up by Millersburg. And he is down, there's a saloon at the bottom here, you can kind of see, actually, right there. If you go to Northfield today, that building is actually still there. This is, they call it the Yorker building, they have a different name for it now, but Beerman building. And if you see in the circle, you can see the top of that door, and he came out of there, and and there's, some people say he was drunk, some people say no, he wasn't drunk, doesn't matter, but he was in there, and he came out, and just wrong place at the wrong time, and he gets a bullet in the side of the head, but it doesn't kill him. It's kind of a glancing blow, but he does die 4 days later. So he becomes the second victim here, and while this is going on, A.R. Manning, after he shot the horse, his cartridge stuck in the gun, so he ran back to his hardware store, get a ramrod, get some more shells, takes a second shot, goes through the banister of the staircase and buries into Cole Younger's hip. And so Cole Younger's now wounded. We've got another shot going on, and Manning takes another shot at Bill Chadwell, right through the heart, and he's dead before he falls off his horse. He actually stays on his horse for a few jumps and ends up on the street in front of the Opera House there. So chaos going on. Bob Younger comes out, and this is the shot here that, in my opinion, is the Achilles heel of this whole thing. Bob Younger comes out, sees A.R. Manning, so he's going to go to try to take the threat out. Does not see Henry Wheeler with a .50 caliber, and Henry shoots down and shatters his right elbow. That is the wound that really is going to slow them down and allows them to get caught. So basically things go into hell in a handbasket, and they just have to get out of there. So they ride south on Division Street, and here's a good view of that, but it was chaos, utter chaos. Now, inside the bank, I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but these were the three guys in there. Joseph Haywood was the acting cashier that day. When those guys came in at 2 o'clock, Alonzo Bunker ended up making a run for it. He got shot by Charlie Pitt, so he's wounded. Bob and Charlie go out of the bank first, and on the way out, as Frank James is going out, he puts a pistol to Haywood's head and kills him. The reason he killed him, number one, he was drunk, he was frustrated, and because Haywood would not open the safe. He lied to him and told him it's on a time lock. Well, there is a time lock, but it was already at the time where it was open. So they found out afterwards, if they would have just turned the handle and pulled, the safe would have opened. But Haywood is regarded as a hero because you got to remember, banks were not FDIC insured back then, and all of the town's money was there. So if they had gotten away with that, the town would have been devastated. So Joseph Lee Haywood is celebrated as a town's hero for good reason as well. So anyways, that was what happened inside the bank. The duster, like I said, this one here, a friend of ours made this. She does a lot of historical clothing, and she found the 1872 blueprint that these inverness capes were made off of. So this one is to spec, and that's an actual one that was left by one of them in the bank. And so that's actually in the archives in St. Paul, at the Minnesota Historical Society. So very, very cool relic from there. I'll go back real quick, one picture. This was taken shortly after the robbery. This is what it looks like inside the bank today. A lot of the same stuff that's there. The clock is the same clock that was there, set to 2 o'clock. The vault is there. This is really cool. This is the book that was opened that day, and you can see J.S. Allen's name is the last name on the list. And you probably can't see it on the screen here, but there's actually blood spatter on there from Haywood on that book yet. But that's in their museum as well. So, a quick summary of the robbery. They thought they were going to get about $75,000 in that money, so they were going to get a really big haul out of this. What actually happened is they got $26.70 worth of nickels. Not a good trade, but they ended up just leaving them there because I did the math on it, it'd be about 10 pounds, and so the sack was actually there. So they actually got nothing out of the bank, not even nickels. They were going to try to destroy the telegraph equipment. That didn't happen because they couldn't go west. So they ended up going south, and they had to go through the big woods unguided. Since that map was found in Bill Chadwell's pocket, they was assumed that he was their guide, so they had no way of knowing how to get through. I mean, they had compasses and maps, but they did not know the territory. So again, they're in a bad world of hurt. 2 gang members killed, 2 citizens killed. The entire robbery lasts 7 minutes. So I spent all this time. I could just reenacted it, probably a little quicker, but that would be really weird. But anyways, 7 minutes it took to do all that damage. So now we got to remember, we got 6 members. Bob severely wounded, riding away on 5 horses. And this chase is going to turn into the largest manhunt in U.S. history. I don't think a lot of people understand the scope of this and the number of people involved in this manhunt. So. Again, I'll just skip through this here. This is kind of a summary of what I showed you. One thing to remember, when Claude Miller was killed and Bill Chadwell was killed, they fell off their horses. Well, their horses were fine, so their horses are running around the street, and they ended up, since they're herd mentality animals, they ended up together in front of the livery stable. So not only did they lose 2 guys, they lost 2 good horses as well. So when we talk about the escape from Northfield, these are the manhunters, okay? So here's some of you guys are familiar with General Pope, but this ascent, these were not everybody involved, but these are some of the key players involved. Even John McDonald, sheriff out of Sioux City, Iowa, actually came up and was helping in part of the chase as well. So those 2 horses that I told you got loose. 2 Northfield citizens by the name of John Davis and Jack Hayes, they got those horses, grabbed some lever action Winchesters and crawled on, and they actually took after them. So here's the James Younger gang getting chased by their own horses. They got south to Dundas, and then they got a little nervous as the further away they got from Northfield. These guys were like, oh, are we walking into a trap? So they kept trailing them, but they did back off, but they did get within like shouting distance of them. And so anyways, the escape part 1, I'll just quick show you. It started to rain that night. And it rained for the next 2 weeks, so this became one of the wettest times in Minnesota's history, and of course this is when these guys are trying to escape. It helped them and it hurt them. It also slowed the posse down, but these guys were in miserable conditions, but I think that's important. A lot of people don't point out the fact that it was so miserable and so much rain. This was their escape route from Northfield to Mankato. Again, I'd love to talk about that, but I just want to skip to where we're at. There's the big woods. That's kind of what it would look like. In fact, this was taken in that area. So this is what they're fighting. You could actually walk 6 feet in there and you can't see anything beyond that. I actually took a picture of section 5 just above Waterville, and this is where they tried crossing and they couldn't cross, but you can see the marsh. You would not take a horse through that. There's no way you could take a horse through it. And so finally, they abandoned their horses. They tied their horses up near German Lake, and this really helped them because they could maneuver a lot quicker than trying to get a horse through that jungle. And they didn't. The posse was still looking for people on horses, so these guys were sneaking on foot, and they wouldn't find these horses until 3 days later. Finally, they did find them, and I found a bunch of cool backstories on the horses, but again, no time for that. So anyways, we got close to 1,000 posse members. Here's where we're going to start with our escape for part 2. So beginning on September 14th, they sneak through the town of Mankato. They actually come within a few blocks of General Pope's headquarters, unbeknownst to both parties. But until this point, it was kind of a free-for-all. There was we had posses everywhere, there was no organization to it. So finally, they're like, we need somebody that can actually direct this thing. So they got a hold of General Pope out of Mankato, and he became the Generalissimo of Forces, and he had unfettered access to the railroads and to men, and he was kind of king of the posse, I guess, at this point. So he, being a smart general, realized we need to lock down the Blue Earth River. So every point, every crossing was guarded very, very heavily, except the railroad, because he talked to the railroad, and the railroad said, "Hey, don't worry about it. We got our own guys." So he just let the railroad take care of that. What he didn't know was that when the railroad said we have it covered, it was going to be covered by like a young boy and a couple of guys that were really in them. And so that was their guards. And guess what? That's the bridge that they got across. It was described that night as Egyptian darkness. I actually did the lunar, you can just Google what was the lunar position of the moon on such and such a date. And we were at about 0.68% illumination, so less than 1%. So it was like pitch black. And so anyways, they start walking across the railroad bridge, and they come face to face with this young boy. And it scared them both, you know, and I don't know if it was Clell or whoever the leader was, but said, hey, are you looking for the outlaws? And scared the kids, so the kids yells, you know, shoot them. Well, the other guys got so scared they took off and left the kid by himself. Well, he got scared, so he took off, and so these guys just walked right across the Blue Earth River Bridge. Again, they did not know they were on foot. They were still thinking these guys were on horses. So a friend of mine used to work at the archives in Pipestone, and here's that railroad, there's the bridge there, and it was about 2 a.m. when they crossed over. But above there's the road that goes into Mankato. That was the main road, and it was actually guarded by this guy. This guy, this friend of mine, found this in the archives at Pipestone, and he talks about that night, and he was in charge of 10 guys on the west side of the bridge, and there was another guy, and he described they had that bridge guarded like they would do in the Civil War, and I kind of had a picture made up to look like that. They would, in the middle of the bridge, they would take chain and rope and run across there. So if somebody tried running across on horses, they obviously weren't going to make it. And then the people on the open side of the bridge, they would be hiding in the bushes. So if the outlaws would run in there, they could actually just capture them and corner them in the bridge there. So that was really cool to find that out. So here is their escape past that. Now this is where it's going to get real interesting, I think, because now we are getting past Mankato, and they get pushed off of a place called Pigeon Hill. So if you're familiar with Minneopa Falls, okay, beautiful place. The railroad runs right through there, and so they were following the railroad tracks. It's the same railroad tracks that they took into Minnesota. As they are coming back across there, they get to this place called Pigeon Hill, and that is literally just across from Minneopa Falls. And they had stolen some chickens. Remember, these guys have not eaten, had a good night's sleep for a long time. It's a week after the robbery, and they had stole some chickens, and they had built a small fire. They were just ready to roast them, and are ready to start eating them. And Detective Hoy went running up Pigeon Hill and pushed them on the backside. So now they're on the run. And they get down to a place near Jones Ford, which is just kind of by Rush Lake. They're just east of Rush Lake. And at this point, they have to make a crucial decision, and this is where they decide, we need to split up. We're going to get caught. Bob is slowing us down so much. Of course, his brothers didn't want to leave him. And so they decide to split up, and Frank and Jesse strike out on their own. So that's the direction. We're going to follow these guys. We'll quick follow Frank and Jesse, and then we'll come back and do the youngers. Well, remember I said Pope had access to the railroad. While these guys are by Jones Ford, he sends a railroad in advance to Lake Crystal, and they set a picket line from Judson to Lake Crystal all the way down to Garden City, and they had that locked down pretty well, actually. And so here is the site where the youngers and the James split up, so you can see they were fighting technology. They were fighting the railroads and the telegraph. So these guys, it's amazing the story, because they kept getting nets cast out in front of them, and every time they were able to slip through it. So that's where the gang split. So here's Frank and Jesse, and they sneak to the north side of Rush Lake, and they come to the John Vincent farm, and they steal. He had one horse, and they stole that horse. No saddle, it was just a draft horse. So they take his horse. They find some lines for his harnesses, and they cut them up, made a head saw of it, and they took off, and they make it about a little mile and a half or so. What they didn't realize is here's that picket line in front of them. So between Crystal Lake and Loon Lake, there was 10 guards there. Now here's, again, in their favor, 9 of the guards thought, these guys aren't going to be coming through here, so they're sleeping. They're laying in the brush, and about midnight, we get this one guard named Richard Roberts from Mankato. He hears a horse coming, and he's like, jumps up out of the weeds and yells, halt. Well, they don't halt, so he fires a shot at them, and they both fall off the horse. And it's kind of assumed, and I think for a pretty good reason, that's probably where Frank James received his. He got shot in the right. We know he had he got shot in the right leg, and we think that's where it happened. But regardless, Frank and Jesse fall off. Frank loses his hat, and they sneak off into a cornfield. Now remember, it's dark, so again, to their advantage, Posse is going to have to wait till morning to find their tracks and to start looking for these guys. So they know that, so they sneak into a cornfield. And this is the spot between, this is where that happened. So if you drive between those two lakes, that's where that event happened. Little side story here, but it was kind of cool. The hat I was telling you about, I actually found the names of the two guys that found the hat and what the hat looked like. This was actually out of the Red Wing Goodhue County newspaper. Okay, so Frank and Jesse, Frank's got a wounded leg. They're tired. I mean, things are really not going good for them. Yet they were still able to have a little bit of luck once in a while. This is their lottery ticket right here. Just a little bit to the northwest of Garden City was the Seymour Farm. And we're quick talk about Garden City here. This is a little newer map from that, like 1879 or so. But if you look at this map, you're going to see a person that says J. Rockwood right under where it says city. Joseph Rockwood was a Baptist minister, and I was kind of joking around. I said that he loved three things. He loved the Lord, he loved his family, and he loved Percheron draft horses. Okay, hopefully in that order, but you know everybody's priorities are different. But if you go to Garden City, it's really cool. I did not know this. His church is still there. It's an event venue today, but if you look at the plaque, it'll say established 1868. So that was his church. And this is what he had on loan at the Seymour Farm. He had a pair of gray Percheron draft horses. It was described as some of the best horses in the country, and these horses are going to become famous here over the next couple of weeks. So we've got these Percheron draft horses, and they steal them and they hightail it across. They get across Blue Earth County. They get north of Adelia. Now this for me was fun when I could come up with something that nobody else did. A lot of the history books, a lot of the newspapers talk about stopping at the Jackson Farm. Well, I started researching, well, where's the Jackson Farm? I couldn't find it. I went to land office records. I went to census records. There was nobody in that area by the name of Jackson in the 1875 census. So I'm thinking, I wonder if it was maybe reported wrong. So I start looking at the census records, and I find north of Adelia there is a guy by the name of Andrew Jerkson. Like, ooh, that's interesting. So I go to Adelia, we go through the old newspapers. Sure enough, we find this article that was written like 2 days afterwards. It describes in detail how these two guys on gray horses stopped. They got something to eat, and one of them was missing a hat, and he needed a hat, so he asked the lady, "Could I buy a hat from you guys?" And she said, "Well, my son Peter's, I just bought him a hat. I guess I could sell you that one." So she sold him the hat. And also during the research, it was kind of cool. That's where the stop was at. That's Peter there. So at his 50th wedding anniversary, I found this picture of him. So when he was 18, it was his hat that these guys got. So kind of cool. All right, so they make their way across Watonwan County, and they stop at the Nelson Farm, and I believe that was section 18. Where they stopped and got something else to eat, and then they kind of had a little bit around the skirts of Brown County and Watonwan. So what's interesting about this is, if you're familiar with the capture side of the Youngers later on, that red star indicates that, and there's an old stage road that ran through there. Now again, some of the stuff you have to kind of speculate a little bit. I can look at old maps and road maps. If I know where point A is and point B, you can get a pretty good idea, but it's very likely that they rode right past the spot where their partners would be captured a week later on. So, anyways, they're going across, and they get to Cottonwood County, and they stop at a German farmer by the name of Edward Krause. Now, this again, I just threw this graphic up, and I just spent a lot of time on this, but this red line indicates the Sioux City-St. Paul Railroad. So Pope had sent Detective Hoy and Sheriff Eric Barton out of Rice County. They had sent this train in advance. They dropped this group of guys off at Mountain Lake, another group off at Windham, and then Sheriff Dill and his big group of guys, they went all the way down to Heron Lake, and they ran a picket line from Heron Lake all the way up to Curry. So again, they had these guys locked in. Little did any of these guys know that just 8 miles straight north of them, that very night is where they stayed at the Krause farm. So again, just kind of luck and intuition, I guess. So as they cut their way across Cottonwood, they get into Murray County, they cross the Des Moines River, they stop at Mrs. Swan's farm, stop at a Lutheran church, or they're seen outside of there, and they're just kind of making their way across. So now we're into Rock County, and there's 3 documented stops in Rock County. So here's kind of the path that they took, and oops, let me go back one. Okay, that's the path that they took going across those counties. What was really neat is after I did all this research, I actually found this map, an 1876 map of Minnesota, and some of the proposed railroad routes and old trails, and every one of those 12 documented accounts are right along that red line of that trail. So pretty good indication that's the route that they took there. Okay, now we're going to get into kind of my specialty of this is the 3 days in Dakota, the part that I really started researching and studying. So we're going to be talking about just east of Sioux Falls, Minnehaha County, and Lincoln County. So prior to that, there was this account, and I think I've got, okay, so if I go back to, I'll just show you, just north of Laverne, Minnesota, there was a family called the Rolfe family. And this is a very well documented stop. So about 12 miles north of Laverne, Sunday morning, September 17th, 1876, about 7 o'clock, these two guys ride up to the Rolfe farm. Mr. Rolfe is on his way north to visit an Indian encampment, and he sees 2 guys riding, but didn't think anything of it. Well, those guys came to his farm and had breakfast, and when they left, Mrs. Rolfe talked about how it was raining, and these guys were sore, and these were masters of deception. I mean, these guys were lying to her and said, well, hey, our wagon broke, that's why we're riding gray, and they're still riding these gray draft horses from Garden City. Those draft horses are going to it took those guys 150, 160 miles in 2 days. So these horses got the tar road on them, and she recognized that. And she said, in fact, these guys were so sore when they left the farm that morning, they had to bring the horses over to a fence to crawl up on it, actually, just to get out of there. So, so good eyewitness account from her. And so here's into Dakota Territory now. I just want to go, I thought I had one more. I think I'll jump back here just real quick. Okay, well, the thing that I was really looking for was there wasn't a lot of information about other than the Mrs. Rolfe incident, but I finally found what I was looking for. I went to Rock County looking for the 1876 newspaper. They didn't have it, and they had published in the Rice County Journal a few days later this article I was looking for from Laverne, and it describes in detail Sheriff Rice and who was with him and his posse of guys, and essentially he said they gave up the chase 3 miles east of the old town of Palisade, South Dakota. So if you look at my map here, you can see where Sheriff Rice lost the trail a little bit further north, Hallett and Taylor. And again, it was dark that night. Once again, I did the search for the lunar eclipse, or the lunar position. It was super, super dark. So he loses their trail, and this kind of describes all that. If you guys ever been to Palisade State Park, ever heard of it? Okay, I didn't realize this. That used to be a silver mine. So Palisades actually started as a silver mine, but the Sioux quartzite was so hard to get through. But it did become a town, and there was a mill there, and you can see the picture of the mill there. And they crossed just a little bit south of that mill. Again, they weren't being chased, and they crossed the border at 6:30, and the sunset was right at 6:30. So they crossed, and they followed the Split Rock down. Now, I want to make mention of this because this is a very well documented stop. Brandon, South Dakota. Wasn't a town then, but if you know where Brandon is at, there's a golf course. Just kitty corner from the golf course is this farm right there. That farmstead is the Nelson. That sign actually is still there that talks about it. But the Nelson homestead, this is a very good documented stop. They come through and they travel 13 miles along the Split Rock, and they stop at the Nelson farm, and this is his son. I believe this was in 1924. They interviewed him again. He was outside that night, him and his dad, and these 2 guys on gray draft horses ride up, and these guys are so sore, and they're just tired. They can hardly. They ask for to water their horses, and so they visit for just a few minutes, and then Mr. Nelson and his son go to bed. Well, Frank and Jesse come back a little bit later and steal his horses. See, he had two mares in the barn, 2 black mares, and 2 yearlings as well. So Frank and Jesse leave the Nelson farm with their gray horses that they have from Garden City and 4 horses of the Nelson. They go a short distance away, they tie the poor grays up, they take the 2 yearlings and tie them up because they didn't want them whinnying, that's why they took them with the mares. And then they take these 2 mares and now they're on fresh horses. Life is good, they're walking along the Sioux River and they realize these horses are blind. So they actually stole blind horses, so they had to went from here to down here. But one was blind in both eyes and one was blind in one eye, but they did continue to ride them. And in fact, he even describes here how they found the horses a little bit later away. So from the Nelson farm, on these blind horses, they come straight down south and they stop at the Samuelson farm. This cabin was built in 1874 and it's still part of one of the South Dakota state parks. They would have stopped at this cabin and they asked Samuelson for directions on how to cross the Big Sioux River. Well, he told them, so they get across and now they're on the west side of the Big Sioux River. And again, this is Sunday night, real late at night. So we're getting close to midnight now on the 17th. So they cross and they head a little bit further south. Now, people ask about those gray horses. Did they ever make it back home? Yes, they did. The Nelson farm, actually, the Worthington stage line ran right past his house. So either the next morning or the morning after that, he sends the horses back with the Worthington stage, and they make it all the way to Laverne, where the railroad was at this point, because the railroad was being built from Sioux Falls to Worthington, but it wasn't quite there yet. But it was at Worthington. So once they got to Worthington, they were able to put these horses on the train, and they take them all the way to Worthington. And those horses actually, this is really cool if you see this article, these horses became famous. People were coming from all around to see the famous grays or the flying grays. So they made it there and they ended up making it all the way back to Medelia. But really cool story. This is not the last. We're going to hear one more story about these gray horses a little later on. So pretty cool stuff. All right, so they continue along the Sioux River, and I'll kind of speed this part up, but they stop at the Peter Lohman farm. Here's where they realize Sioux Falls doesn't have a railroad or telegraph, so now they're at least kind of at the same level of technology as everybody else. They're not going to get nets cast in front of them. So they continue their way south, and ironically enough, all of these places, there's 3 South Dakota state parks there, and all of them have a connection with this escape here, so it's pretty cool. The Lohman farm is part of Good Earth. Those blind horses I was telling you about, these articles that talk about, these horses were found 12 miles south of their place. I pulled it up on Google Earth where these horses were found at the PC Park Farm, and as you can see, it's right on the dot, exactly 12 miles. So that was some pretty good reporting for back then. But, so yes, the horses, the blind horses, actually, they also got their way back home to the Nelson farm. All right, Monday, September 18th, this is where my jaw hit the floor when I was reading that first article. Okay, so they're coming along the banks of the Big Sioux River, and Monday night they stay at the Ole Rongstead farm. This is Mrs. Rongstead. About 7 o'clock they go to the Rongstead farm, and they ask, to stay the night, and they do. In the morning, the family gets up, and these 2 guys are gone. And their son, George, was with them. I believe he was 21 or 22 as well. And so they just thought something was kind of odd. These guys would just get up and leave without saying anything. So the next morning, these guys, and there's a picture of where the Rongstead farm is. That's actually just a few miles from my house. And so in the morning, these guys get up and leave. And this is, again, what that river valley looks like in the vicinity. The horses were found at the PC Park Farm. Okay, so here's Canton, South Dakota, and then this is the region that I'm talking about right now. And Monday morning, so this is where the story gets really good. They leave the Rongstead farm and they walk to the Fowler farm. This is what their view would have looked like. This is looking south from the Rongstead farm down towards their next stop. They find some mules here, and they were just about ready to get mules, and then they looked across and they see horses across the road. This is where Peter Wall was working that morning, and his brother John, and a guy named Andrew Schulzen. So they were on the Anderson farm working that morning when 2 guys come walking up, and they said, "Hey, we are looking for horse thieves, can you help us out? So of course, Peter Wall gets his horse out, and Andrew Schulzen gets his horse out. As soon as they do, they get guns pulled on them, and get their horses stolen. And again, that's the documented story. Well then, here's where that robbery actually occurred. So, in the morning, the article tells about it. In the morning, George Rongstead goes after to try to find these guys, and within minutes of the robbery, George Rongstead comes up to the Anderson farm, finds Peter Wall, and says, "Hey, these two guys stayed with us last night. Have you seen anybody?" They're like, "Yeah, they just stole our horse." So George is on a horse. Peter Wall gets another horse out, and they literally go after. Of course, they have no idea it's Frank or Jesse James. Just a couple of jerks that stole their horses. So they chase them across the Sioux River into Iowa, and then Andrew Schulzen, he goes to Canton for help. Okay, so now we're in Iowa, northwest Iowa, just a few miles, just across the Dakota border. And so there's Frank and Jesse. Here comes Peter Wall and George Rongstead, and they get to the article, I believe, says about 8 rods. So they're about 40 yards away from them, and one of the outlaws, we don't know if it was Frank or Jesse, takes a shot at him. Peter Wall ducks back, and the bullet misses him, but it hits George Rongstead's horse in the neck. And it goes one side, doesn't do any damage, other than a hole, puncture wound, and it gets lodged in the soft tissue on the other side. So his horse is kind of out of the running, but not severely, but he realizes, I need to go back to town for help. So George Rongstead goes back to Canton with his horse. Peter Wall keeps following him at a little safer distance, of course. But it's again, now it starts to rain again. So he loses their tracks, and out of Canton comes another posse. They meet up with Peter Wall. They lose him. It turns out that Frank and Jesse ended up going east to a small town called Dune, Iowa. All right, and again, that was kind of their approximate route. But here's some evidence that talks about that they were near the Fairview. This is what the town of Fairview would look like around that time period. And this is another drop for me. George Rongstead rides into camp, and here it talks about the horse and the bullet wound. Here's another one, talks about the horse and the bullet wound, and people were coming out and feeling that, and they ended up extracting that bullet, and the horse was fine, so good news there. So I started researching this Rongstead family. And so, Ole Rongstead, there's George. George later in life moved out by Mitchell, South Dakota. He had a son named Oscar. Oscar had 3 daughters. I ended up talking to this one on the phone a while back when I started my research, and her name was Joyce Phyllis, and she lived out of Hopkins, Minnesota. And she was super excited to learn that somebody was researching her family because she always heard the story. So she sent me a bunch of their family stories and stuff that had been published. And so before we hung up, she said, "I think my nephew still has that bullet that was in that was shot." And I was like, "No way," But I kind of put off to the side. I had a lot of stuff going on, and she passed away a few years ago. But in 2024, that kind of came back, and I was like, I should try to find it. So I did some more genealogy work. Actually found her nephew. Lives out by Boston, and he could not believe that I tracked him down. He's like, "How did you ever know about that story?" I kind of told him I'm kind of nerdy researcher, I guess. And so I asked him if he'd send me a picture. He still has that bullet. So that is the bullet that. What's really cool is that that bullet, when I look at it, has only been handed down 3 times since 1876. So he told me the story. George gave it to his son Oscar. Oscar did not have any sons, so he gave it to his eldest grandson, which is the guy I talked to on the phone. So that was kind of a cool side story on that one. But okay, so Canton, South Dakota. I'm gonna really fly through this stuff here. Canton, South Dakota. It got reported as Yankton, South Dakota. That really again helped the James brothers because we're gonna get back to get close to Sioux City, Iowa now. They are in Iowa, heading towards Sioux City. Sheriff John McDonald, who was part of the original posse up by Mankato, gets a message that said, "Hey, these guys are going to Yankton." So everybody's thinking, "Oh, they're going for the Missouri River." So look at what they do. They guard the Missouri River while Frank and Jesse are nowhere near there. They're in Iowa. So they head down, and after a few days, McDonald's like, "Gosh, I don't think they're coming this way." So he goes back to Portlandville, and it's called Akron, Iowa now. And he sends a message down to Sioux City saying, "Hey, I think these James brothers are going to be in the area pretty soon." So the message is out, Sioux City is kind of on alert, and there's this crazy encounter that you're about to hear about. Dr. Sidney Mosier was a doctor from Sioux City, and he hears about this lady from Kingsley, Iowa that's really sick. I mean, like really, really sick, and she's just, they're pleading with him to come out and help. He doesn't know where she lives, but he knows about where Kingsley is. So again, with the rain, his horse and buggy were not going to make it. So he goes to the Broadbent livery stable, and he ends up getting, he ends up renting a horse. Well, while he's running his horse and tacking it up, he hears all this talk about Frank and Jesse James being in the area. So anyways, he takes off and he goes north of Sioux City, starts making his way towards Kingsley, stops at a place, asks for directions, and they said, well, just keep going, you're in the right path. So he keeps going and he sees two guys on horses, and he's like, oh, I wonder if these guys know where Mrs. Mr. Manley is. So he, of course, he rides up to him and they spin around, pull guns on him. And according to his article, I'll show you guys, he literally said, who do you think I am, Jesse James? It was Jesse James. And they were not happy. In fact, they were going to kill him on the spot, and he begged them and said, I'm a doctor. So they went back and verified to the house before that, yes, he is a doctor. So then they used him, because at this point they still don't have saddles for their horses. So they took his horse, which had a saddle, and they go to the next farmhouse. They say, hey, we are with Dr. Mosier. We need a saddle. So they get a saddle and use it for food. And long story short, they end up keeping him prisoner for about 3 or 4 hours, and they turn him loose somewhere in that vicinity. I got it down to about a 2-mile radius, but so they turn him loose. But before they turn him loose, Frank James made him change clothes with him because their clothes were wore out, muddy, and he had a brand new suit. So him and Frank changed clothes, and for many years he had Frank James's pants hanging in his office. So good conversation there, a lot of good documentation there. So long story short, the James brothers keep going. They make their way across Iowa. They're still 2 days ahead of the posse, and finally, ironically, this came out on the 23rd, but really on the 21st is when the last known encounter was them on the Coon River south of Sac City, Iowa. So now Frank and Jesse have escaped. They've basically given up on them, and this was their escape path. But now we'll quickly do this with the younger brothers, and this is maybe get a little bit closer to home here for you guys. Ironically, on the same day that Frank and Jesse get away, this is where we're going to now hear about the younger brothers. So remember when I said that Cole was in St. Peter and he went to Medelia? This is Colonel Thomas Vogt. He was the guy that was the owner of the Flanders House, Civil War veteran, and just a really, really cool story. I've been researching him a lot too, and his family, where he ended up at. So they stopped there, and after the Northfield robbery, and they started hearing about the news, this Thomas Vogt's like, you know what? There was 2 guys here, and they were asking about the geography, and they were asking about where to get good horses, and he told them about the Doolittle Farm in Riverdale Township in Whatcom County, and so he gave them a lot of information, but he was smart enough to remember, you know what? They were asking about this crossing, this bridge before as well, and so he goes, I better go check that out. So Thomas Vogt kind of puts 2 and 2 together, and he realizes I better go check and see. And Cole Younger, in his book, even says that's what damned their party, was his stop at the Flanders House. So that was interesting that Cole even recognized that. Okay, so here's Linden Lake, as you can see on the left there, and we'll talk about some of the characters here. So he said he went to Gardy Bridge, and there's a couple different schools of thought here, but I'll show you some pictures of some map overlays here in a second, but it's most likely that bridge was, because he described it as a bridge between 2 lakes, and of course the geography's changed a little bit since then. But there's another school of thought that Mount Pisgah would be that bridge because it's such a high elevated position, like the bridge on the ship would be. So, but either way, we're talking within like several hundred yards of each other. But that's where he was positioned. And I've got a map of some of the elevations just to kind of show that difference. But and so there's Mount Pisgah out there. And so right in here is where he was sitting. And while he's sitting there, he draws the attention of course, Osla Sorwell, often referred to as Oscar Sorwell. And we get to the spot. Now, just want to show you the map. Again, we don't know their exact route. We know they were here, and we know that they were, they'll end up being north of Linden Lake. Somewhere between there was their route, and you can look at some of these old maps and maybe get a good idea of which route they would have taken. But it's important to remember, nobody was really looking for these guys. They were all, attention was focused on these great horses running across Minnesota and Dakota. So these were kind of forgotten. There was a few people on the lookout for them, but for the most part, they did not draw a lot of attention. So on Thursday the 14th, they head out towards their next stop where they're going to be seen. Now, interesting to note, the James brothers, in this time period, they covered 220 miles. These guys made just about 20. Okay, so that just shows you how slow and how behind it was because of Bob Younger's wound. Again, had Bob Younger gotten killed in Northfield, or had Henry Wheeler missed, probably a totally different story, because they would have gotten away a lot quicker and a lot faster. And again, it's just interesting to think of the possibilities. But at 7 a.m., they're walking around. Again, these four were split into groups of two, because again, they're looking for these people, so they wanted to make them look a little bit. They wanted to be a little more incognito, so they split into groups of two. And on the morning, there's Mount Pisgah, I guess, area. And some of you have probably been to the placard there on the north of Linden Lake, but it talks about it's really cool, cool site to go to. So there is. I looked it up, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right, but Osla is how a lot of pronunciations are, and I'm sure there's different dialects to it. But if I say young Sorrel, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. But he was working at his dad's farm, and again, rainy, muddy. In fact, it was so muddy that they had to take the cows and milk them on the road. And that's pretty important, because as he and his dad are milking cows, here comes two guys, kind of ragged-looking guys, say good morning, they're pleasant, and I think they put their hand on the cow's back, say good morning, and as they walk past, he looks down and he sees toe prints. He thought, they had boots on, that's kind of weird, but they had wore the bottom of their boots out, so he actually saw his feet, like, and I love this part of the story. He's like, Dad, I think those are the robbers. And like any good dad, his dad's like, shut up, get back to work. You know, didn't believe him, you know, like, what, you know, if it is them, you're not going to want to go after them anyways. So his dad kind of laughed it off, but it just kept bothering him and bothering him. And so all right, so again, he gets suspicious, sees the toe prints, and then pretty soon he saw that they walked about 60 rods west of their farm. He seen them cut into the timber. And I got a map, I'll kind of show that. And then that really grew suspicious. Like, why would these guys get off the road? And so he decides to go to the west and warn the neighbors. So according to the documented accounts back then, he stopped at Anton and Meads, and again, don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but Oren or Rin, I don't know how you pronounce that, but that is that. So there's the Sorghum farm up top, and then there are the two neighbors. And he went to the first neighbor and actually crawled up on the roof and tried looking out to see what he could see, and didn't see him. And so he crawls down and he goes, I think he went to a place further west of there and talked to another neighbor, comes back, goes up on Mount Pisgah, looks around, doesn't see anything. So he decides to go back home. And when he went back home, he found out from his mom that, hey, there was two other guys that stopped here for breakfast. And now it's like, okay, those are the four guys. That's got to be them. He knows at this point for sure. And so he sends his 12-year-old sister back to the neighbors to warn them about the other two that were having breakfast. So don't know if that was the smartest thing, but she survived. So he takes a horse and he goes to the east side of the lake. Now here's these two maps I was talking about. I've got an 1874 map and an 1886 map, and you can see between in 1874, which is a little bit closer, you can see where the lakes had changed a little bit and the road had changed, and that's why I'll step front here real quick. That's why when you look at this map here, when you see this person, his farm's way off the road. Well, back then that road used to cut right past his place. So that was one of the things that I had to do, was like, why did they go on this road? Well, that makes sense when you compare to old maps. So anyways, that would be the neighbors, and you can see if I overlaid that compared to the old map, that goes right past the Genesis place there. So this red line shows where they cut into the woods and they skirted Lake Linden. And according to his accounts, 60 rods, that's right on the money from where they would have turned and cut in there. And so now Oscar's like, okay, I gotta tell somebody. So his dad says, you can go to town, take the horse, but make sure you go on the east side. So that's the route he would have taken back to Madelia to warn the others. And you gotta remember, this kid's 17 years old, he's excited, he's flying down the road and fell off his horse at least once, covered in mud, and he comes riding up to, about 9:30 he gets into town and he's looking for Colonel Vogt. And again, this is Thomas Vogt's, this is the Flanders house here. The reason I put this picture on here, you know where the livery stable is. In fact, I think I'll show this picture in a little bit, but I was looking for this for the longest time because there's an account that will tie in with this livery stable in just a little bit. Okay, so he gets to town, and while he's doing that, the younger brothers are taking this route along straight south in Linden Township and getting into Watonwan County. So he gets to town, he finds Colonel Vogt, Glispin, James Severson, and Will Estes. Okay, so these four guys are at the Flanders. Dr. Overholt ends up being with them, so I don't know if he was in town and went with him or if they met him along the way. But eventually, these five are your five initial responders to the call for help. So as they leave Madelia, they start going out, and this is a very consequential stop here. Or they meet this guy along the road by the name of John Flitty. John Flitty, had they not run into him, this whole story could have a different ending, because John Flitty happened to see four guys walk past his dad's farm that morning on Section 2 of Riverdale Township. So he's running into these posse, he goes, hey, I just saw four guys a little bit ago across my dad's farm. Little side note, John Flitty, prominent person from Madelia, he ends up being North Dakota's first Secretary of State. So that's how nerdy and in depth I go on some of this stuff. But so anyways, they run into him, like, okay, now they have a target to go to. Rather than going all the way back up to the Sorrel farm, they have a little better direction of where these guys are at. So there's his dad's farm, and they ride past the farm, and now they're closing in. Okay, I've got a box there with a star on it. At this point, that is where the Youngers and Charlie Pitts are having breakfast at the Scarpool farm. So there's John Tronston, that's John Flitty's dad, and here comes the posse riding past. I'll go back a little bit. The posse rides past, and they see him coming. I don't know if they were half a mile away or so, but the Youngers see this posse coming, and they know they better get out of it. So they lit out, and they're at the Scarpool farm. There's a later picture of it. And here comes the posse, and the outlaws chases on. So they take off across this first little slough. The horses are able to get through it, so now they're starting to gain and catch up with them. There's some shots exchanged, some words exchanged. Now they get to Hanska Slough, and this was a little bit more difficult. Horses were not able to get through this. So remember, the Youngers are on foot at this point, so they cut across the slough, and they actually get a little in advance. And I told you earlier about the John Doolittle farm. This is the John Doolittle farm here. That's the horses they were going for. And had they got the horses, this again would have had a different ending to it. And so Dr. Overholt and Vogt go up to the north to find a crossing. And Sheriff Glispin and his guys go a little bit further south, and he sends Severson back to town to tell the rest of the posse where to come. And they come across and they start closing in, and they realize, hey, these guys are heading for the Doolittle farm. So they advance, and they're going to try to cut them off. Some more shots are exchanged. Actually, Dr. Overholt takes a shot and hits Cole Younger's walking stick. Because remember, Cole got shot in the hip back in Northfield. So he's limping along on the stick, and Dr. Overholt shoots, breaks the stick, which is ironic because in a little bit he's the one that's going to be pulling the bullets back out of him. But at this point, he's trying to put bullets in him. So, so they get a little bit closer, and finally Overholt and Vogt kind of overtake him, and they cut him off. All right, so now we're getting a little closer past Hanska Slough and into the Watonwan River Valley, and they get beaten. The outlaws get beaten to the Doolittle farm. So now they've lost their ability to get those horses, and things are looking really, really, really desperate for them. Will Estes is out of ammo, so he goes back to send a telegraph to St. James to get some more ammo and tell the rest of the guys where to go along with Severson. And Cole Younger even says, this was kind of what doomed him. He said, we were excited about long-sword horses when they cut us off from the animals and our last hope was gone. And again, that's pretty profound to come from Cole Younger. All right, so here is where it's noted as the capture site. The capture site's actually a little bit further to the east there. But this was a map drawn shortly afterwards. It kind of shows how they crossed, where they crossed. If you notice what the Anderson house is there, now this map is not to scale, and it's a little condensed, but Anderson was actually outside with his horses that day working, and here comes the Youngers on the other side of the river. So they're on the north side, and they yell at him, "Hey, send us some horses." Well, he knew something was up. He knew these guys were bad guys, so he turned his horses loose and just skedaddled them out of there so that they couldn't get a hold of them. So then they had to cross. They had to cross the Watonwan, and then they started coming around here, and they found one more hope. Right along here, there's this little stable road used to run along here, and there was a guy by the name of Horace Thompson that was out there with his family. He was a bank president out of Minneapolis, St. Paul area, and he was out there hunting that day. And here comes Cole and these outlaws, and they say, "Hey, there's two carriages with horses. That's our last hope." So they start walking towards there, and Horace and his son see these guys coming. They could see him getting chased, so they knew something was up. These are bad guys. So he loaded their guns with some different shot. And from a distance, Cole and his crew did not know if they were rifles or shotguns. They realized, we're probably outgunned here because, again, James Younger gang just don't have pistols. So they decided to abandon that plan, and you can see where then they cut back into this kind of covey here. So I've got a little bit of a drawing of what happened. There's the Horace Thompson affair. So now they get into this cover, and at least they've got some protection. All right, so I'm going to throw a lot of maps and graphics up here. Captain W.W. Murphy comes along the scene with some of his guys, and now some of the guards that were at the Anderson or at the Doolittle farm realize that they're not going to be able to make it, so they start heading over. And now we've got Bradford and Rice and some of these other guys that are part of the Amelia 7. They start showing up, and we've got, I'll put this graphic up and leave it. So this is going to set the stage. So now we've got the bad guys in this real heavy covered area, and we've got tons of posse members here, and 7 of them step forward, and these are the 7 that are going to go in, and they're just going to have to manually get these guys out of here. I've been putting this map together of a lot more of some of the names that were involved with the people, and some of them we have good documentation of where they were positioned and where they were at. But as you can see, there's a lot of guys there, and things were not looking good for the Youngers. So that's about 1 o'clock when the whole posse really starts putting together. Here comes Murphy, and this is where I think this is kind of interesting because this came from Cole Younger's book here. Here comes the Amelia 7 walking towards them, and here's the 4 outlaws in the cover. And Charlie Pitt said, Cole Younger says to Charlie Pitts, he goes, "Pitts, if you want to go out and surrender, go on." And Charlie Pitt says, "I'll not go." He says, "I can die as well as you can." You got to remember that Charlie Pitts and the Youngers were very, very tight. The reason they were so tight is that during Bleeding Kansas era, I can't remember what year, 60. Maybe 6, I remember the year, but Cole Younger's father, Henry Younger, was murdered by Union militia. And Charlie Pitts, I think he was with his mom, they found the body, and he stayed there and he protected and covered that body until they could get help. And because of that, Cole Younger felt this bond with them for what he did for his dad. So these guys were not going to give up, and basically the gunfight is on. Charlie Pitts is killed right away. Cole Younger is shot. He's out of it. Jim Younger gets shot. He's out of it. Bob Younger gets shot, but he's his arm's still healing, but he's still pretty sore. So he finally gives up, and he says, "They're all done with me." And he comes walking out, and he's surrendering. And somebody from I believe his name was Bundy, from the north side took a shot and shot him in the lung. So Bob's shot. Now, Sheriff Glisman is very angry at this point because people are shooting. But I will say, there's finally, at this point, the Minnesota has seen some positive news, because up until now, escape. Nobody's getting caught. Nobody's being held accountable. So this was a big deal for these guys to actually get to catch some of them. So this is a really cool picture. This is there's a girl on a horse riding side saddle. that is Henry Doolittle's daughter, and that's taken at the capture site. And this had to have been within weeks afterwards, because not long after that, they ended up moving away from the area. So that's a cool picture. That's actually in the museum at Northfield and also Watonwan County. So back to the Flanders house. They take these guys back, they throw in a wagon, and here's the Medallia 7 standing in front of the Flanders Hotel where that famous picture was taken. Here's what they look like a little later in life. But so there's the Medallia 7. Capture photos. Here's Bob. Bob ends up with 4 bullets in him. Jim Younger ends up with 5. As you can see, he gets shot in the mouth and shattered his jaw, busted a bunch of teeth out. There's kind of weird things, like one of the attending physicians, not Dr. Overholt, but another one, kept his teeth as like a souvenir. I mean, these guys, they kept weird souvenirs. I mean, I can go really deep. I get some really weird ones like that. So they got 5 bullets in him. Here's Cole Younger. He's got a bullet wedged up behind his eye. That's why his eye's swollen so bad. He has a total of 11 bullets in him. What I think is so ironic about this is, yes, I mean, I about go down and cry when I stub my toe. He's got 11 bullets in him. He said the most painful thing in this whole ordeal is when they laid him on the bed in the Flanders Hotel and they pulled his boots off, all of his toenails fell off because they were so infected and rotten from all those weeks of, that's the same reaction I should get. I love telling this story. I even tell them to my 8th graders, because I love watching pictures. Of course, they're more like, cool, do you got pictures? But anyways, so there's that's the result of those guys. Attending physician was Henry Overholt, and that was really cool. He ended up pulling that 45-70 slug out of Cole Younger's hip and gave it back to A.R. Manning. So A.R. Manning actually had that bullet that he fired at him. Northfield, he kept it as a souvenir for quite a while. But okay, back to the Flanders house. 2 days afterwards, J.H. Hanson's there interviewing the guy that was part of the posse originally, documenting all this. So now he's back on the scene and he is interviewing these guys. And I came across this one, and I thought this was really interesting. They talked about how much money was found. They didn't have a lot of money or any of their pocket watches, because they had given most of that to the James brothers when they split up at Mankato, realizing they got the best chance of getting that stuff back home to the family. But as I'm looking at this one was really cool. It says, speaking of the gray horses, they were in town that day. They were in that livery stable. Go back here. Those great Percheron horses had made their way back there. And Bob Younger was noted, this was a direct quote from Bob Younger. He looked out the window with a smile and he said, "You see, I am as curious as the rest of you." So that was the last glimpse that he actually had of his old, the James brothers. But I just thought that was a really cool side note to that. So I'm researching, okay, now what's going to happen to these guys? So I found the complaints that were filed against them. Charlie Pitts' body is sent to the coroner in St. Paul. And conflict begins to brew because this is a high-profile case. St. Paul wanted the publicity of this, but it happened in Rice County. So Barton and Glispin kind of put together a coy. They sent a fake train up to St. Paul, and so there was thousands of people that were waiting to see these famous outlaws. Nobody on the train. While that train was going up there, they sent another train over to Faribault with the outlaws in it. So 2 days later, they actually show up in Watonwan County, escorted by some of the Medallia 7, and they were then delivered to Eric Barton in Faribault. If you go to Rice County, there is actually the jail register for that day, and so there is their names in that register, which is in the museum. Now, when they get to Faribault, this was really cool, I think. Eric Barton, he wanted to know 2 things, because at this point they still don't know. They assumed it was Frank and Jesse James, but they didn't know at this point. So the sheriff said, "I want to know 2 things. I want to know who killed Haywood, and who are the names of the 2 that got away." And he kept pestering Cole. Finally, Cole says, "I tell you what, I will give you my answer in the morning." In the morning comes, sheriff goes to the jail cell. Cole Younger hands him a note, and this is the note. This is actually in the archives of at Northfield. It says, "Be true to your friends if the heavens fall, Cole Younger." So pretty much giving him the big middle finger, like, no, I'm not telling on my friends. But it was for me, it was really cool because I got to hold that note. And so we were doing some research last year. They were kind enough to open that up, and they were handing all kinds of stuff. one of the things that right after this, I should put it, I've got pictures I can show you later, but after they handed me that note, they said, well, you might like to look at this. And so they hand me this package and I flip it over. It's Clem Miller's ear and part of the scalp. I mean, it says Charlie Pitts on there, but it was, remember, these outlaws, it took them a while to identify them. So the first 2 weeks, they actually got the wrong names on them. So yeah, there's some goofy stuff in there. But there was a huge concern for vigilante justice. Remember, the people of Minnesota had just lost 2 of their citizens by these outlaws from Missouri, and there was a concern for vigilante justice. There was maybe a little, I think there was overblown, the concern, because what's interesting is Cole Younger really talked about the kindness that the Minnesota people gave to them. I mean, there was people coming, women were coming and praying for them, and that really, he really hit him how good the citizens were to him. But there was a concern for some vigilante justice. So Barton stationed guards around there and said, basically, it's a shoot to kill type of situation. And he put this protection order, and on October 2nd of 1876, there was a $5 bet. There was a special policeman named Henry Kaepernick, and he was telling his friends, I bet I can get up there to this. So he starts walking up there, it's dark out, and the guard says, stop or I'll shoot. And he says, don't you know who I am? And he reaches in here to get his badge. Of course, they thought it was a gun. He was going for a gun. So they shoot him, and he is killed. So Frank Glanzer is the guard that killed him, and this we kind of consider this as the 6th fatality of the Northfield raid, even though it happened about a month later. Here's an article that talks about it, and we were out there, and this is the spot where he was shot, just across from the courthouse. So interesting side story that a lot of people don't really know about. Okay, so they were on the 8th of November, they were presented with these 4 indictments against them. And at the advice of their attorney, it's really cool. I found actually the actual indictments, and I was able to go through and research and read some of the witness accounts and everything that goes along with those. And in there, they realized that we're probably gonna hang. So they decided to plead guilty. So it did not go to a trial. There was no trial. They just pled guilty. The judge sentenced them to life in prison. So here we are, November 18th, they get sent to Stillwater, and they begin serving their life sentence at Stillwater. There are their inmate numbers, there's Cole's booking photo. While they are there, they actually serve as model citizens. They realize if we have any chance at all getting out, we had better be on our best behavior all the time. Cole Younger, they ended up starting the prison newspaper, which is still a prison newspaper today. They were in charge of Cole ended up working in a hospital ward. There was a fire at the women's prison, and at one point they were actually given weapons to help guard the other inmates, and they were trusted at that point, and they gave them back afterwards. And so these guys, but they were still serving a life sentence. They even got to put on nice clothes and get a picture taken with their sister Henrietta while they were in prison. And so that's kind of the aftermath now. The gang is decimated. They're in prison. Finally, to wrap it up here, Jesse James murdered in 1882 by Robert Ford. 1886. Okay, so now they've been in prison for 10 years. Cole gets an unexpected visitor. Any guesses? The 6-year-old girl is now 16, and she shows up on the visitor request, and he said, I only know one person by that name. It's going to be that little girl. And sure enough, it is. So Horace Greeley Perry comes to visit him, and by now she is the owner of the St. James Journal. Her dad, used to be. So she is, at this point, she's not the owner. She's a reporter. She ends up becoming, and she spends the next 15 years garnering public support to get these guys out of prison. And Cole Younger actually says in his, because there really was no proof that he killed anyone. Yes, they robbed the bank. They copped that. But as far as anyone dying, they were there, but they couldn't really prove that anyone pulled the trigger. So she spent the next 15 years and did get them out of prison. Bob didn't quite make it though, because he dies because of that lung shot he got along the banks of the Watermelon River. He got tuberculosis and set in, and he ended up dying from consumption in 1889. This is a cool picture. This was taken either on, or I would guess either on or very shortly close to, the 4th of July. This is Stillwater, Minnesota. In the background, you can see the prison. This, on the 14th of July, so 10 days after this picture was taken, the Youngers are paroled. Okay, so Cole and Jim get paroled from prison. The only thing is there's a couple conditions. You can't leave the state of Minnesota. You can't enter any contracts. You can't own a firearm. You know, there was some conditions on with it. But they, because of Forrest Greeley Perry, they did get released. Okay, so they get released on the 14th of July. They go back to society. A lot of technology has changed since then. They get some jobs working in different locations. In 1902, Jim is staying at the Reardon Hotel. And during his time in prison, he ended up becoming friends with a lady named Alex Mueller. And I think she was a reporter, but they fell in love, and they just had this bond. And part of the parole, he wanted to marry her, and they were in love, wanted to get married. But I think he even asked the governor if he could get marry her, and they said nope, you can't enter any contracts. He was devastated. He was brokenhearted. So he kills himself on October 19th, shoots himself in the head at this hotel here. So he's dead at the age of 54, and then now it brings up the Younger story again, so it becomes news all over. And they actually published his suicide note in the paper talking about how brokenhearted he was. So, and he had some issues, because really he didn't want to do this robbery in the first place. They kind of enlisted him to help, so he kind of felt jilted a little bit. 1903, finally, the state of Minnesota changes the condition of Cole Younger's parole and says now you can no longer come back to Minnesota, but you can leave Minnesota, and you can't profit off your crime. Well, within weeks, I mean, he had been planning this, but within weeks, Cole Younger, and he gets a full pardon, and he publishes a book, and him and Frank James end up purchasing the Buckskin Bill's Wild West show. So they go on a nationwide tour. It was popular, but it was a financial failure because of, I don't know, bad bookkeeping or whatever. But there's a program for it. And what's interesting, there's his press agent, Horace Greeley Perry. So she actually traveled with them guys for a while. And there is an incredible side story about her and what she did in her life and some travels in Mexico. If I were to write another book, it would probably be about her, because it's a really, really cool story about her. So anyways, I'm digging through the archives. This is a hotel in my hometown of Canton. Remember, Cole Younger, now after prison, he's on a book tour, speaking tour. In 1911, June 16th, he shows up in my hometown of Canton. And he stayed at this hotel. And here's a story that talks about him staying there. And this is where he gave his, talk on what life has taught me. And so it was really cool to find that. This is a postcard. After doing this research, I actually found this postcard on eBay, and I was like, oh, that's cool, but I have a picture. But on the back side of it, I had to buy it for this reason. It was sent from Medelia, Minnesota. So I'm like, yeah, for $15, I'll buy that thing. So that's how that turned out. Frank James ends up dying at 72 in 1915, and 1 year later, Cole Younger, last of the James Younger gang, passes away at the age of 72 in Lee Summit, Missouri. Alrighty, Jesse James, defeated Jesse James days. I'd never been there before until last year. My brother and I went out there, and it was really cool. So here's some pictures from that. They asked me to do 3 different presentations. I did one on the guns that were used at the Northfield raid, and talk about the early days, because a lot of questions are like, why did these guys do this? Why were they so vicious? Why were they so mean? Why did they do what they did? And so they opened up the case and let me handle some of the firearms that were used that were taken off these guys. And so that was really cool. I mean, we handle firearms a lot, and I was like, where's your silicone ring? I need to wipe these down. He said, oh, you'll be fine, but we wiped them down really good. So, but anyways, it was really neat for them to give us access to that. In fact, I got to lay, there's Cole, that's one of the pistols was taken off of Cole Younger, so I get to lay that on some of my book covers and get some good promotional shots. Not that that's what I wanted for, but it was just, I had the opportunity to do that, so that was pretty cool. Alrighty, if you guys want to learn more about this, first thing is my nephew he's doing kind of a history podcasting, and so I got to be his first victim, or a guest I should say. So he has a podcast called Sewer Syndicate, and he's going to do a lot of like military stuff and a lot of history and Civil War stuff. So that is someplace you can find it. I did this year, I did a thing on Facebook for people if they want to follow, because I keep adding all the weird, cool, interesting things, side stories to it. So I do have a Facebook page for that. And again, I never planned on writing a book. I didn't plan on doing any presentations, but people kept saying, "Oh, I'd love to read more about this." So I did. It was about a year ago actually when we got this published. And so we do have a book here. It's available on Amazon, Kindle, Amazon. I've got some here today too. But anyways, and here's my email. I love answering questions. So sometimes people say, "Hey, I've got this story about great grandpa's barn or whatever," and I can say, "Well, it's plausible," or "No way did that happen." But one thing. It's Russ.Swanson70. Make sure you put the 70 because there's some poor Russ Swanson out there that's getting all these Jesse James questions, and he's like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." But so it's Russ.Swanson70 at Gmail, and that is it. Thank you.